The morning fog hung heavy over the Colorado mountains, wrapping the peaks in a ghostly embrace. Sarah Mitchell stood at her kitchen window, coffee cup warming her weathered hands, as she watched her husband Michael prepare for the day. 25 years as a rescue helicopter pilot had etched deep lines around his eyes, each one a story of lives saved and lost in these unforgiving peaks. The modest rancher-style house sat nestled against the foothills, far enough from the city to offer peace, but close enough for Michael to reach the rescue base when duty called. The walls held countless awards and commendations, though Michael had tucked most of them away in drawers, preferring instead to display photos of his rescue team and the mountain landscape he'd sworn to protect. Today was different. The familiar sound of Michael's morning routine carried a heavier weight. 5 years had passed since the crash. 5 years since he'd lost two of his closest friends while trying to save a family stranded in a blizzard. The memorial site, a small clearing where the helicopter had gone down, had become sacred ground for the rescue community. "Dad?" Emma's voice broke through the morning quiet. Their daughter, now a flight nurse herself, understood the significance of this day better than most. "Are you sure you don't want company? The memorial site's been getting rough lately. Those bikers have been—" Michael's voice carried from the hallway, steady despite the emotion beneath it. "I'll be fine, sweetheart. Been handling the mountains longer than you've been alive." His attempt at lightness didn't quite mask the concern they all shared about the growing tension at the memorial site. Sarah watched as Michael adjusted his old rescue jacket, the patches faded but proud. The pin on his collar, marking 30 years of military service before joining mountain rescue, caught the early morning light. He'd never been one to broadcast his past, preferring to let his actions speak instead. "At least let me drive you," Emma persisted, her medical bag already slung over her shoulder. "The storm riders have been causing trouble up there. Last week, they nearly ran the Anderson family off the road when they tried to visit." Michael's face hardened slightly at the mention of the motorcycle gang that had recently claimed the mountain roads as their territory. The storm riders had no respect for the sacred nature of the memorial site, often using the clearing as a party spot, their bikes scarring the ground where Michael's friends had fallen. "Some battles," Michael said quietly, checking his pocket watch, a gift from his rescue team, "a man needs to face alone." The watch's inscription caught the light. "For those who fly into storms, so others may live." Sarah moved to her husband's side, straightening his collar with practiced hands. "Just remember what Dr. Torres said about your blood pressure. No need for confrontation." The worry in her voice reflected the stories they'd all heard about the storm riders' increasing aggression toward visitors to the memorial. Through the kitchen window, the mountains loomed silent and majestic, unconcerned with the human dramas playing out in their shadow. Michael's old truck sat in the driveway, its bed carrying the fresh flowers and small American flags he placed at the site every year. "I remember when we started this tradition," Sarah said softly, helping Michael gather the memorial items. "Just after the crash, when you said we needed to honor not just the loss, but the commitment to service." Emma appeared with additional flowers, her face etched with concern. "The news said the storm riders have gotten more territorial. They don't understand what that place means to us, to the whole rescue community." Michael's hands stilled on the flowers. "Understanding comes in its own time, Emmy. Sometimes people need to learn the hard way about respect." His voice carried the weight of experience, of lessons learned through decades of service, both in the military and mountain rescue. The morning light grew stronger, painting the kitchen in warm hues as the family completed their preparations. Sarah watched her husband check his phone. These days, the rescue team insisted on constant contact, especially with the growing tensions on the mountain. "Just remember," Emma said, adjusting her father's jacket one last time. "You're not alone in this. The whole team's on standby if you need us." The concern in her voice spoke to recent events: vandalism at the memorial, confrontations with visitors, the growing disrespect for what should have been hallowed ground. Michael nodded, his expression softening as he looked at his daughter. She'd followed in his footsteps, understanding the call to service that had defined his life. "Some things," he said quietly, "are worth standing up for, even when standing alone." The sound of distant motorcycles echoed through the valley, a reminder of the changing times and new challenges facing their peaceful mountain community. Michael gathered the last of the memorial items, his movements deliberate and focused. "Time to go," he announced, though they all knew he'd been preparing. For this moment since dawn, the weight of memory, of responsibility, of honor, settled around his shoulders like a familiar cloak. Sarah and Emma watched from the porch as Michael's truck disappeared up the mountain road, the morning sun catching the rescue service emblem on its door. The fog was beginning to lift, revealing the peaks where Michael had spent his life saving others, the same peaks that had claimed his friends 5 years ago. "He'll be all right," Sarah said, though whether she was reassuring Emma or herself remained unclear. "Your father knows these mountains, knows how to handle himself," Emma nodded, but her hand tightened on her medical bag. "It's not the mountains I'm worried about, Mom. It's what's happening to them." They both knew she meant more than just the physical scars left by careless visitors. She meant the loss of respect, the forgetting of sacrifice, the fading of memory. The mountain road twisted upward through stands of towering pines, Michael's truck handling each curve with familiar ease. The memorial items in his truck bed rustled softly with each turn, flags and flowers waiting to honor fallen friends. Through his open window, the crisp mountain air carried memories of countless rescue missions, both triumphant and tragic. His radio crackled to life, rescue base keeping track of their own. "Mitchell, you copy? Just checking your 20. The voice belonged to Jake Torres, lead dispatcher and son of their team doctor. "Copy that, Jake, just past Thunder Ridge." Michael's response was automatic, years of protocol embedded in every word. He didn't mention the growing rumble of motorcycles in the distance, though he knew base was monitoring the situation. The memorial site lay ahead, nestled in a natural clearing where the helicopter had come to rest 5 years ago. Tom and Marcus, his closest friends on the rescue team, had died, ensuring their passengers survived. The family they'd been rescuing walked away with minor injuries, saved by the pilot's final act of courage. Michael's hands tightened on the steering wheel as he remembered that night. The blizzard had been brutal, visibility near zero. They'd found the stranded family just as their fuel gauge started flashing warnings. Tom, ever the optimist, had joked about missing dinner. Marcus had promised to buy rounds once they got back. Neither made it home. A group of motorcycles roared past, their riders wearing the distinctive Storm Riders patches. They paid no attention to his truck, focused on their own journey up the mountain. Michael watched them disappear around the bend, their engines echoing off the cliff faces. His phone buzzed. Emma checking in. "Dad, Carlos from the sheriff's office called, said there's unusual activity at the site. Maybe we should postpone." "Can't postpone remembrance, sweetheart." Michael's voice remained steady. "Some things need doing no matter what." The road widened as he approached the clearing. His heart sank at what he saw, motorcycles parked haphazardly across the entrance. Their riders gathered around what remained of the memorial marker. Empty bottles littered the ground where he'd planted flowers last year. Michael parked his truck at the turnoff, gathering his thoughts before stepping out. The morning sun had burned away the last of the fog, revealing the full extent of the site's desecration. The small fence he'd built to protect the marker lay broken, tire tracks scarring the earth where Tom and Marcus had made their final sacrifice. Need. Something, old-timer, a voice called out as Michael reached for the flowers in his truck bed. The speaker, a tall man with a leather vest emblazoned with Storm Riders President, approached with calculated confidence. "Just here to tend the memorial," Michael replied, his voice carrying the same calm he'd maintained through countless rescue operations. "Been doing it every year since we lost them." The biker's laugh drew attention from his companions. "Lost? Who? This is our mountain now, Gramps. Your little garden party's gonna have to find somewhere else to happen." Michael continued gathering his materials, each movement measured and deliberate. The flags in his hands caught the mountain breeze, snapping crisply despite the tense atmosphere. "5 years ago," he began, his voice carrying across the clearing, "2 men died here saving a family of 5. This ground means something to a lot of people." More bikers gathered, forming a loose circle around Michael and their leader. The president, whose vest identified him as Razor, stepped closer, intentionally blocking Michael's path to the memorial marker. "Yeah? Well, now it means something to us. Best pack up your little flower show and head back down the mountain while you can still ride that old truck." Michael's phone buzzed again, probably Emma or the base, monitoring his tracker's prolonged stop. He ignored it, focusing instead on the sacred duty that had brought him here. "Those men were my friends," he continued, meeting Razor's gaze steadily. "They gave their lives doing what was right. This place deserves respect." A younger biker kicked over the remains of last year's plaque, drawing laughs from his companions. "Respect's earned, old man. And right now, you're not earning anything but trouble." Michael watched the plaque fall, Tom and Marcus's names disappearing into the dirt. His military training screamed at him to react, but decades of rescue work had taught him that sometimes the hardest part of any mission was maintaining composure. "You're right," he said quietly, surprising the bikers with his agreement. "Respect is earned. Those men earned it with their lives. The family they saved, 3 children who got to grow up because 2 pilots refused to give up. They understand that respect." Razor's expression darkened. "Nice story, Gramps, but this is our party spot now, so unless you want things to get really uncomfortable, I suggest you take your flags and flowers and base to Mitchell. How's your status?" The radio in Michael's truck crackled to life, interrupting the confrontation. The bikers tensed at the official-sounding voice. Michael reached through his window, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. "Mitchell here. Site's occupied. Might be here a while." The dispatcher's response was immediate. "Copy that. Want us to send backup." Before Michael could respond, distant sirens echoed off the mountainsides. Several bikers looked nervously at their leader, but Razor stood his ground. "This isn't over, old man," he growled, gesturing for his crew to mount up. "Your little memorial's gonna have to find a new home." As the motorcycles roared to life, Michael stood quietly by his truck, watching them scatter like storm clouds before wind. The sirens grew closer, but he knew they weren't coming for him. Emma had likely called in every favor the rescue service, only to ensure her father's safety. The clearing fell silent again, save for the mountain wind whistling through the pines. Michael looked at the damaged memorial site, understanding that his annual tribute had just become something more. A stand for respect, for memory, for the values that had guided his life's service. His radio crackled one final time. "Mitchell, you clear?" "Clear," he responded, "but we've got some cleaning up to do." The mountain breeze carried the last echoes of motorcycle engines away as Michael knelt to retrieve the fallen memorial plaque. Sheriff Carlos Rivera's patrol car appeared around the bend, followed by 2 more deputies. The cavalry, as Emma would call it, arriving just moments too late to witness the confrontation. "Mike," Carlos called out, emerging from his vehicle with one hand resting cautiously on his belt. "Got a call from Emma. Said you might need some company up here." His eyes scanned the clearing, taking in the scattered bottles, tire tracks, and trampled flowers. Michael continued his work, carefully brushing dirt from the plaque that bore his friends' names. "Just a disagreement about respect, Carlos. Nothing I couldn't handle." The sheriff's expression darkened as he surveyed the damage. Storm riders have been pushing boundaries all across the county. Started as small stuff, noise complaints, public drinking. Now they're claiming territory, intimidating folks. This is the third time they've vandalized the memorial site. More vehicles appeared on the mountain road, rescue service trucks, their lights flashing in solidarity. Michael recognized the lead vehicle as belonging to Dr. Torres, the team's long-serving physician, and the man who'd helped save countless lives alongside Tom and Marcus. "Couldn't stay away, old friend," Dr. Torres called out, his weathered face creased with concern. "When Jake said you were up here alone, well..." He gestured at the gathering of rescue personnel emerging from their vehicles. The clearing, so recently dominated by hostile bikers, now filled with familiar faces. Each person carried something: tools, flowers, cleaning supplies, the rescue community taking care of their own. "The storm riders," Carlos continued, watching his deputies, "photograph the damage. They're led by a guy named James Razor Maxwell, ex-military dishonorable discharge. Been building his crew for the past year, targeting peaceful spots like this." Michael straightened, plaque in hand, as Dr. Torres approached with a fresh mounting bracket. The two men worked in comfortable silence, years of emergency room coordination evident in their movements. "You know," Dr. Torres said quietly, holding the bracket steady, "Tom and Marcus would have appreciated the irony, spending their careers saving people only to have their memorial become a battleground for territory. More rescue service members spread through the clearing, collecting trash, repairing damage, restoring dignity to hallowed ground." Michael watched them work, remembering countless missions when these same hands had reached out to save strangers in danger. "Mr. Mitchell," a young deputy approached, notepad in hand, "we'll need a statement about the confrontation for the record." Before Michael could respond, the distant roar of motorcycles echoed off the cliffs. The storm riders were returning, their engines growing louder with each passing second. Carlos stepped forward, positioning himself between the road and the memorial site. His deputies spread out, hands near their weapons. The rescue service personnel continued their work, though their movements became more deliberate, more focused. Razor led his crew around the final bend, but this time he wasn't smirking. His face darkened at the sight of law enforcement and the gathered rescue community. The bikers spread out behind their leader, their previous bravado somewhat dimmed by the official presence. "Well, well," Razor called out, killing his engine. "Called in the whole cavalry, did you, old man? Can't fight your own battles?" Michael placed the restored plaque carefully on its new mounting. "No battle here, son. Just people paying respect to fallen friends." Razor dismounted, his boots crunching on scattered glass from his crew's earlier party. "Respect? You want to talk about respect?" His voice carried a new edge. "I've seen what respect gets you. Served 2 tours myself before. They decided I wasn't officer material. Now you want to lecture me about respect?" The clearing fell silent, save for the mountain wind. Michael turned slowly, studying the younger man with new understanding. The military bearing was there, beneath the artificial swagger. The hurt, too, masked by aggression. 2 tours, Michael said quietly. "Where?" "Afghanistan. 2nd Rangers Battalion." Razor's voice carried a hint of pride before he caught himself. "Not that it matters now." Dr. Torres stepped forward, his own service pins visible on his jacket. "Always matters, son, just like this place matters. These men died serving others, just like we all swore to do." Razor's crew shifted uncomfortably, several of them noticing for the first time the military pins and patches worn by many in the rescue service gathering. Their leader's expression flickered between anger and something deeper. "That's the past," Razor spat, but his voice lacked conviction. "We make our own rules now." Michael picked up a folded flag from his truck bed, handling it with practiced reverence. "Tom Anderson," he said, gesturing to the restored plaque. "Marines, 3 tours. Joined Mountain Rescue because he couldn't stop serving others. Marcus Chen, Air Force Pararescue. They died making sure a family lived." Sheriff Carlos watched the exchange silently, his deputies maintaining their positions but sensing the shift in atmosphere. The confrontation was becoming something else, something more complex than territory or respect. "Your colors," Michael continued, nodding toward Razor's vest. "Storm Riders. You chose that name because you face the storms others run from. Not so different from what we do up here." Razor's hands clenched into fists, but his eyes were fixed on the memorial plaque, on the flags now flying straight in the mountain breeze. Behind him, several of his crew removed their helmets, military training showing through their biker personas. "You don't know anything about us," Razor growled, but the threat in his voice had been replaced by defensive hurt. "You don't know what we've been through." "Maybe not," Michael agreed, holding out the folded flag, "but I know what it's like to lose brothers, to carry that weight. This place, it's not just a memorial. It's a reminder that service doesn't end when the uniform comes off." Razor stared at the folded flag in Michael's hands, his tough exterior cracking slightly. The mountain wind whipped through the clearing, carrying with it the weight of unspoken understanding. Behind him, several storm riders shifted uncomfortably, their earlier bravado diminishing in the face of revealed truths. "You think a flag changes anything?" Razor's voice carried a tremor he couldn't quite hide. "You think standing here with your rescue squad and your deputies makes you better than us?" His hand reached unconsciously toward his vest, where beneath the leather Michael glimpsed the edge of military medals. Dr. Torres stepped closer, his own service medals catching the sunlight. "Nobody's talking about better or worse, son. This place, it's about remembering what service means, all kinds of service." The rescue team continued their quiet work, restoring the memorial site with practiced efficiency. Each movement carried purpose, dignity. Several storm riders watched with growing unease, their own military training recognizing the precision, the respect in each action. "5 years ago," Michael began, still holding the flag, "we got a call. Family trapped in a blizzard, running, out of time. Tom and Marcus didn't hesitate. Weather was too rough for a safe approach, but they knew what was at stake." Razor's face tightened. "Save your story, old man. We've all got stories." 3 kids in that family," Michael continued, his voice steady. "Youngest was about 6, same age as the boy you pulled from that burning Humvee outside Kandahar." The clearing fell silent. Razor's face drained of color. Behind him, his crew straightened, recognition dawning in their eyes. Sheriff Carlos watched intently, his hand moving away from his weapon. "How—" Razor's voice cracked. "How did you know about that?" Michael gestured to his own collar, where a familiar pin sat. "2nd Rangers Battalion. I was there, different company, but we all heard about the sergeant who went back into the fire, the one they later pushed out because he couldn't adjust. To peacetime rules." Dr. Torres moved forward, understanding blooming in his weathered features. "James Maxwell," he said quietly. "I remember treating your burns at the field hospital. You never stopped asking about the boy." Razor, James, staggered slightly, caught between his cultivated outlaw image and the rush of memories. A younger storm rider stepped forward to steady him, military bearing evident in his movements. "The boy lived," Michael said softly, "just like the family Tom and Marcus saved. Different wars, different mountains, same choice to put others first. The memorial, black gleamed in the morning sun, newly restored. Tom and Marcus's names stood clear against the metal, their final act of service preserved in more than just memory. You don't understand." James fought to maintain his composure. "They threw us away. All that talk about service and honor, Then they decide we're not good enough for peacetime. Nobody here is throwing anyone away, Dr. Torres replied. Look around you, son. Every person here, rescue service, law enforcement, medical team, we all found ways to keep serving, different uniform, same mission. Several storm riders removed their helmets completely, revealing close-cropped hair and telling scars. The divide between the two groups began to blur, understanding replacing hostility. The storm riders, James gestured to his crew, we look after our own. Nobody else would. Michael placed the folded flag on the memorial marker. That's what we do here too, look after our own, all of our own. Sheriff Carlos stepped forward, his own military service evident in his bearing. The county's been trying to establish a veterans outreach program. We need people who understand what it's like, who can reach those struggling to adjust. James looked at the memorial site, really looked at it for the first time. The carefully maintained ground, the fresh flowers, the flags standing proud against the mountain backdrop. His crew watched him, waiting for direction. Tom and Marcus, Michael continued, they knew what it meant to transition from one kind of service to another. This place, it's not just about remembering their last flight. It's about remembering that service takes many forms. A young storm rider stepped forward, removed his vest to reveal paramedic patches underneath. Boss, he said quietly to James, maybe we've been fighting the wrong battles. The mountain wind carried the faint sound of helicopter rotors. A rescue operation somewhere in the distance. Every head turned toward the sound, military and civilian alike, understanding the call to action. James looked at his hands, calloused from motorcycle handles instead of rifle grips. We didn't mean... he started, then stopped. The boy in Kandahar, he really lived? Graduated high school last year, Dr. Torres confirmed. His family never forgot what you did, just like the family Tom and Marcus saved never forgot their sacrifice. The clearing held its breath as James Maxwell, known to his crew as Razor, leader of the Storm Riders, faced the choice between holding on to anger and embracing a new kind of purpose. The memorial plaque caught the sunlight, the names of fallen heroes, a testament to the ongoing cost of service. Around them, the mountains stood silent, witness to another moment of transformation, another chance for healing. James took a hesitant step toward the memorial, his Storm Riders crew watching intently as their leader struggled with internal conflict. Behind him, more of his members removed their helmets, their military bearing becoming more evident with each passing moment. Your friend Tom, James said quietly, eyes fixed on the plaque. Marine Corps, you said? 3rd Battalion. Michael. Confirmed. Served in Fallujah before joining Mountain Rescue. A flicker of recognition crossed James's face. 3rd Battalion. Was he there during Operation Phantom Fury? Command unit, Dr. Torres added, understanding dawning in his eyes. He coordinated emergency medical evacuations. James's hands trembled slightly as he reached into his vest, pulling out a worn photograph. November 2004, his voice caught. My unit was pinned down, heavy fire. Marine rescue chopper pulled us out. Never knew the pilot's name, but... Michael moved closer, examining the faded photograph. There, amid the chaos and smoke of battle, was a younger Tom Anderson, helping wounded Rangers into his helicopter. That's him, James whispered, the tough biker persona cracking further. Your friend. He saved my entire squad that day. The clearing fell silent as the revelation settled. Over everyone present, Sheriff Carlos exchanged glances with his deputies, their hands now completely away from their weapons. The rescue service personnel paused in their restoration work, understanding the weight of the moment. Tom never talked about that day, Michael said softly. Like many of his missions, he'd just say it was part of the job. Dr. Torres stepped forward, his medical training recognizing the signs of long-buried trauma surfacing. Many of us carry pieces of the past, son. The trick is finding ways to honor those memories through service rather than anger. A senior storm rider, his vest revealing a combat medic patch, approached James. "Boss, maybe this is why we were drawn here. Not to claim territory, but because somehow we knew this place meant something." James stared at the photograph, then at the memorial plaque. "All these years, I've been carrying his picture, never knowing, and now we've been disrespecting his memorial." Michael placed a steady hand on James's shoulder, the gesture bridging years of misunderstanding. Tom would have understood. He knew better than most how hard it is to find your way after service. The distant helicopter sounds grew closer, a rescue operation in progress. Every head turned toward the sound, military instincts still sharp despite the years and changes. "Base to all units," the radio in Michael's truck crackled. "We've got a situation developing on Thunder Ridge. Family of hikers stranded, weather turning bad." Without thinking, James stepped toward the sound, his body responding to the call, and for help before his mind could process it. Several of his crew moved with him, their training overwhelming their cultivated outlaw image. Dr. Torres keyed his own radio. "Base, this is Torres. How many hikers?" "5 souls," the dispatcher responded. "2 adults, 3 children. Weather's deteriorating rapidly." James looked at the memorial plaque, then at Michael. "3 children," he said quietly. Just like the family Tom and Marcus gave their lives to save." Michael finished. He studied the younger man's face, seeing the conflict, the desire to help warring with years of resentment. Sheriff Carlos stepped forward. "We could use extra hands on this one. Storm riders know these mountain roads better than anyone these days." The rescue service personnel began mobilizing, their movements precise and practiced. James watched them, remembering similar preparations. "From his military days, your crew," Michael said carefully, "how many have medical training?" 8, James replied automatically. 4 combat medics, 3 field corpsmen, 1 para-rescue. He paused, surprised by his own immediate response. Dr. Torres was already coordinating with the base. "We'll need every trained hand we can get. Weather's making helicopter approach impossible. This'll be a ground rescue." James turned to his crew, seeing in their faces the same conflict he felt. They'd created the Storm Riders as a refuge from a world that didn't understand them, but here was a chance to serve again, to make a difference. "Been a while since we ran a real operation," the combat medic said, a hint of his old professional pride showing through. Michael watched as James Maxwell, known as Razor, leader of the Storm Riders, faced another pivotal moment. The memorial, site so recently a source of conflict, now stood witness to possibility of redemption. "Tom and Marcus," Michael said quietly, "they believed every life was worth the risk. That's why they flew into that blizzard 5 years ago. Same reason you went back into that burning Humvee." James looked at his crew, then at the gathering of rescue personnel. The division between the groups seemed less distinct now, both sides, recognizing in each other the same core of service, the same commitment to helping others. "Storm Riders," James called out, his voice carrying the authority of his military days. "Gear up. We've got civilians in trouble." He turned to Michael and Dr. Torres. "If you'll have us, we'd like to help." The transformation was immediate. Storm Riders moved with purpose, their motorcycles now tools for reaching the stranded family rather than symbols of intimidation. Combat medics consulted with rescue service personnel, sharing knowledge of the terrain. Above them, the mountain. Clouds gathered, promising the same challenging conditions that had claimed Tom and Marcus 5 years ago. But this time, something was different. This time, 2 groups that had stood in opposition found themselves united by a common purpose, a shared commitment to service. The mountain rescue operation unfolded with military precision, Storm Riders and rescue service personnel working in seamless coordination. James and his crew led the way up Thunder Ridge's treacherous paths, their motorcycles navigating terrain too narrow for standard rescue vehicles. "Base, this is Maxwell." James's voice crackled over the radio he'd been issued. "We've got eyes on the hikers, about half a mile up Western Face. Weather's deteriorating fast." His voice carried the same professional tone he'd used during military operations, years of training resurfacing naturally. Michael, coordinating from the Memorial Site command post they'd established, exchanged glances with Dr. Torres. The storm. Ryder's leader had shed his outlaw persona entirely, replaced by the capable sergeant he'd once been. "Copy that, Maxwell," Michael responded. "What's their condition?" Two adults, mobile but exhausted. Children showing early signs of exposure. "We've got our medics assessing now." The sound of motorcycles powering down carried through the transmission. "Permission to begin immediate evacuation." Dr. Torres leaned into the radio. "Granted, follow standard hypothermia protocols. We've got warming equipment standing by at..." Basically, the memorial site had transformed into an impromptu rescue headquarters. Sheriff Carlos coordinated with emergency services, while rescue team members prepared medical supplies. The remaining storm riders stood ready with their bikes, forming a supply chain up the treacherous mountain path. "Never thought I'd see the day," Carlos muttered to Michael, watching James's crew work with professional efficiency, from threatening the memorial to running rescue operations. Michael adjusted the radio as another transmission came through. "Sometimes people just need to be reminded of who they really are." "Mitchell." James's voice carried urgency now. "Youngest child's condition is deteriorating rapidly. Need immediate evac. Standard vehicles can't make it up here." Dr. Torres grabbed his medical kit. "We need to get up there now. Storm riders." James's voice commanded through the radio. "Form up. We're doing a staged evacuation. Combat medics prep for transport. Remember your training." The transformation in the motorcycle gang was complete. Bikes that had once terrorized the memorial ground now became crucial rescue vehicles, their riders working with the precision of their military days. "Like old times, eh, boss?" The combat medic's voice carried through the radio, the sound of medical equipment being prepared in the background. "Better," James replied. "This time we're saving our own people on our own mountains." Michael watched as the storm riders executed their evacuation plan. Each rider knew their role, their military training evident in every movement. The same skills that had made them effective soldiers now served a new purpose. "First child incoming," James reported. "Rodriguez has him on his bike. Full medical support. ETA 3 minutes. Dr. Torres prepared his equipment as the sound of an approaching motorcycle grew louder. The bike emerged from the mountain mist, its rider protecting a small bundle wrapped in emergency blankets. The storm rider dismounted with practiced care, his combat medic training obvious as he transferred the child to the waiting medical team. Without wasting a moment, he turned his bike around, heading back up for the next evacuation. "Second child en route," James continued his updates. "Maxwell with third child, parents being prepped for transport." Michael keyed his radio. "Good work up there, James. Tom and Marcus would be proud." A brief pause filled the channel before James responded, his voice thick with emotion. "Just doing what they taught us all to do, sir. Looking after our own." The memorial site, so recently a place of conflict, had become a beacon of hope. The flags flew straight in the mountain wind as bikes continued arriving with their precious cargo. Storm riders worked alongside rescue personnel, their previous animosity forgotten in the shared mission of saving lives. "Last evacuee clear of the ridge," James reported finally. "All civilians accounted for. Beginning our descent." Dr. Torres looked up from treating the youngest child. "Family's going to be fine. Another hour up there." He left the thought unfinished, but everyone understood. Without the storm rider's quick response and expert navigation of the terrain, the outcome could have been very different. As James and his remaining crew descended from Thunder Ridge, the transformation that had begun at the memorial site was complete. The Storm Riders had found something they'd been missing since leaving military service: purpose, respect, the chance to serve others. Michael stood by the memorial plaque, watching, as James's bike appeared through the mist. The younger man's face showed exhaustion, but also something else. Peace, perhaps, or the quiet satisfaction of knowing you've made a difference. "Sir," James said as he dismounted, approaching the memorial with new respect. "Permission to address the crew." Michael nodded, understanding the importance of this moment. James turned to face the gathered Storm Riders, his voice carrying across the clearing. "Today," he began, "we remembered who we are. Not outlaws, not outcasts, but men and women trained to serve others. Today, we honored the memory of those who showed us what service really means." The Storm Riders stood at attention, their military bearing now fully visible. Even those without formal service experience had absorbed the discipline and purpose of their veteran members. "This place, James Day," continued, gesturing to the memorial, "it's not just about remembering loss. It's about continuing the mission. The same mission Tom Anderson started when he pulled my unit out of Fallujah. The same mission he and Marcus Chen gave their lives for right here." Dr. Torres moved to stand beside Michael, both men watching, as the Storm Riders found their way back to the values they'd once sworn to uphold. The memorial site had become more than a place of remembrance. It had become a place of redemption. The news of the Storm Riders' role in the mountain rescue spread through the community like wildfire. At the base hospital, James and his crew stood alongside rescue service personnel as Dr. Torres updated them on the saved family's condition. "All 5 will make a full recovery," the doctor announced, his tired face breaking into a smile. "The youngest one's asking about the super-cool motorcycle heroes who saved them." James shifted uncomfortably under the fluorescent hospital lights, his leather vest now bearing both the Storm Riders patch and a hastily added Mountain Rescue Service badge. Behind him, his crew maintained their military bearing, pride warring with humility. "Just did what needed doing," James responded, echoing words he'd heard Michael use. "Like we were trained to." Michael watched from the doorway as the former outlaw biker spoke with medical staff, coordinating future emergency response plans. The transformation wasn't just in James. The entire Storm Riders crew carried themselves differently now. "Quite a change," Sheriff Carlos observed, joining. "Michael, got a call from the county commissioner. They want to officially deputize the Storm Riders as emergency response units for hard-to-reach areas." The hospital corridor buzzed with activity as more rescue personnel arrived to check on the saved family. Among them, Emma Mitchell appeared, her flight nurse uniform displaying the same commitment to service that had defined her father's career. "Dad?" she called out, her earlier concerns about the memorial site forgotten in light of recent events. "You need to see this." She held up her tablet, showing social media exploding with photos and stories of the joint rescue operation. "Storm Riders save family," one headline declared. "Former military members find new purpose in mountain rescue." James approached, his combat medic at his side. "Mr. Mitchell, we've been talking with the crew about the memorial site." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "We'd like to help restore it properly. Make it something worthy of what Tom and Marcus stood for." Dr. Torres emerged from the patient room, nodding in approval. "The family's asking to visit the memorial when they recover. They want to thank everyone involved in the rescue." The hospital waiting room had become an impromptu gathering place, Storm Riders mingling with rescue service personnel, sharing stories and experience. The division that had existed mere hours ago seemed like a distant memory. "You know," the combat medic spoke up, "most of us joined the Storm Riders, looking for that sense of purpose we had in the service. Never thought we'd find it working alongside. Mountain rescue? James nodded, his hand unconsciously touching the photograph of Tom Anderson he still carried. We've been fighting the wrong battles, trying to prove ourselves to the wrong people. All this time, the real mission was right in front of us. Michael watched as more storm riders arrived, bringing supplies and offering support to the rescued family. Each member moved with renewed purpose, their military training now channeled into positive action. The storm riders could be a real asset to mountain rescue, Emma observed, her initial skepticism replaced by professional appreciation. Their bikes can reach places our vehicles can't, and their medical training is top-notch. Sheriff Carlos was already making calls, coordinating with county officials. We've got veterans coming home every day, looking for purpose. The storm riders could show them there's a place for their skills, their experience. James gathered his crew, their leather vests, now symbols of a different kind of brotherhood. Mr. Mitchell, if you're willing, we'd like to learn more about mountain rescue. Do things properly. Honor the legacy of men like Tom and Marcus. The hospital corridor fell quiet as Michael considered the request. Around them, the results of their combined efforts were clear. A family saved, a community united, veterans finding new purpose. Tom always said, Michael began, his voice carrying quiet authority, that the hardest part of leaving the service was finding a new way to serve. Looks like you men have found yours. Dr. Torres stepped forward, medical credentials in hand. We can start a formal training program. Combine military experience with mountain rescue protocols. Create something new. The transformation in the storm riders was remarkable. Men who hours ago had threatened violence at the memorial site now stood ready to continue its legacy of service. Their military bearing, once hidden beneath outlaw attitudes, now showed clearly in their stance, their commitment. The memorial site, James said, addressing his crew. It's not just about remembering the past anymore, it's about building a future. Showing other veterans there's a way to keep serving, keep making a difference. Emma's tablet continued displaying messages of support from the community. The story of the storm riders' redemption, their return to service, resonated deeply with people far beyond the mountain rescue community. We'll need to establish proper protocols, Dr. Torres mused, already planning. Integration between motorcycle units and standard rescue operations, training programs, equipment modifications. James listened intently, the leader in him responding to the challenge of creating something new. Around him, his crew stood straighter, their sense of purpose restored. Tom and Marcus, Michael said quietly. They believed in second chances, in finding new ways to serve. He looked at the gathered storm riders, seeing not outlaws, but veterans finding their way home. The memorial site could use some guardians. The hospital lights flickered as a mountain storm gathered outside, but inside, something powerful was taking shape. The storm riders, once lost in their anger and pain, had found a new mission, a new way to honor their military service. "Storm Riders!" James called out, his voice carrying the authority of both his military past and his newfound purpose. "We've got work to do. Time to show everyone what veterans can really do when we serve together." 1 month after the rescue that changed everything, the memorial site stood transformed. The combined efforts of the Storm Riders and Mountain Rescue Service had turned the once contested ground into a symbol of unity and continued service. "Looking good, isn't it?" James stood beside Michael, surveying their work. The memorial now featured a proper pavilion built by storm riders and rescue personnel working side by side. Tom and Marcus's plaque held the center position, surrounded by flags representing all branches of service. They'd be proud, Michael agreed, watching, as more vehicles arrived for the official dedication ceremony, not just of the memorial, but of what it's become. The mountain road, once scarred by reckless motorcycle tracks, now bore the marks of purpose. Storm Riders had worked with county engineers to improve access, creating dedicated lanes for emergency response vehicles while preserving the site's sanctity. 3 more rescues this month alone, Emma reported, joining them with her tablet. The Storm Riders' response time is cutting our arrival window in half. We're reaching people we couldn't before. James nodded, his leather vest now bearing official emergency response patches alongside the Storm Riders' insignia. His crew had completed intensive training, combining their military experience with mountain rescue protocols to create something entirely new. Got another dozen veterans asking to join, he said, pride evident in his voice. Words spreading about what we're doing here, giving people a way to keep serving, keep making a difference. The clearing filled with an unusual mix. Motorcycle leathers beside rescue service uniforms, military decorations alongside medical credentials. Dr. Torres moved through the crowd, checking on his expanded team of emergency responders. The integration's working better than we hoped, the doctor observed. Military precision with local knowledge. We're setting up similar programs in 3 other counties. Sheriff Carlos arrived with county officials, their presence marking the formal recognition of the Storm Riders' transformation. Behind them, news vans set up for the ceremony, preparing to share a story of redemption and renewed purpose. Mr. Mitchell, a young Storm Rider, approached, his combat medic patches freshly sewn beside his motorcycle club insignia. The family from Thunder Ridge is here. They'd like to pay their respects before the ceremony. The rescued family moved carefully through the crowd, their children now fully recovered thanks to the combined efforts of bikers and rescue personnel. The youngest one pointed excitedly at James. "That's him, Mom! That's the hero who carried me down the mountain!" James knelt to the child's level, his tough exterior softening. "No heroes here, buddy. Just people doing what needs doing, like the men we're honoring today." The family stood before the memorial, understanding now the legacy that had saved their lives. The father reached out to touch the plaque, his fingers tracing the names of Tom and Marcus. "Your friends," he said to Michael, "they started something here, something that keeps growing." More vehicles arrived, military vehicles this time. The base commander had taken personal interest in the program, seeing its potential for helping veterans transition to civilian service. Behind him, a group of recently discharged soldiers looked around with cautious hope. "Been watching what you've built here," the commander told James. "Turning pain into purpose, anger into service. We've got men and women coming home every day who could use that lesson." The Storm Riders stood straighter under the commander's approval, their military bearings showing through more strongly than ever. What had started as an outlaw motorcycle club had evolved into something unprecedented, a bridge between military service and civilian rescue operations. "Got the final approval this morning," Sheriff Carlos announced, holding up official documents. "The Storm Riders are now officially recognized as a specialized mountain rescue unit. Full authority, full support." James gathered his crew, their faces reflecting the journey from antagonists to guardians. The memorial site, once a source of conflict, had become the birthplace of their redemption. "Storm Riders," he called out, his voice carrying the weight of their transformation, "form up. Time to show everyone what veterans can do when we find our purpose." The ceremony began as mountain winds carried the sound of motorcycle engines, not the threatening roar of before, but the steady approach of emergency response units conducting training exercises on the newly improved roads. "You know what Tom would say about all this?" Michael asked James quietly as they watched the gathering. "What's that, sir?" "He'd say sometimes the best way to honor the fallen is to help the living. To keep serving, keep saving lives, just in different uniforms." Dr. Torres approached with more news. "Got calls from 3 other states. They want to implement similar programs. Veterans, rescue services, law enforcement all working together. You've started something bigger than any of us imagined." The rescued family's youngest child had found his way to the Storm Riders motorcycles, now equipped with emergency medical gear and rescue equipment. The bikes that had once symbolized defiance now stood ready to reach those in need. "Mr. Maxwell," the base commander addressed James formally, "we'd like you to speak at the academy. Show our transitioning service members there's a way to keep their oath, just on different ground." James looked at his crew, at the memorial they'd helped restore, at the community they'd joined instead of fought. The anger that had driven them to claim territory had been transformed into something powerful, a mission worthy of their training and dedication. "The Storm Riders," he began, addressing the gathered crowd. "We lost our way for a while, forgot what service really means. But standing here at this memorial, we found something we thought we'd lost, a chance to make a difference, to save lives, to honor the legacy of men like Tom and Marcus, who never stopped serving others." The mountain winds carried his words across the clearing, now a symbol of transformation and healing. The Storm Riders stood proud, no longer outcasts, but guardians, their path forward as clear as the mountain roads they now protected. Years passed, and the memorial site became a beacon of hope for veterans across the country. On a crisp autumn morning, Michael stood watching as a new group of Storm Riders completed their mountain rescue certification, their motorcycles now bearing official emergency response markings. 6 years, James reflected, standing beside him. The former outlaw leader had transformed completely, now serving as chief coordinator for the Veterans Mountain Response Program. "Hard to believe it's been 6 years since we tried to claim this ground as our party spot." Emma approached, her flight nurse uniform complemented by a Storm Riders patch, a symbol of the complete integration between the organizations. "Dad, you need to see this." She handed him a letter bearing military insignias. "The Pentagon's interested," she explained. "They want to implement the program nationally, use it as a model for veteran reintegration through emergency services." The memorial site had grown beyond its original boundaries. A proper training facility now stood nearby, where veterans could transition their military skills into rescue operations. The sound of motorcycles echoing through the mountains no longer brought tension, but relief. Help was on the way. "Tom and Marcus," Michael said quietly, touching the original plaque that still held the center position. They'd never believe what their sacrifice inspired. Dr. Torres, now running the medical training program for veteran responders, joined them. His weathered face broke into a smile as another group of bikes roared up the mountain road, their riders a mix of former military personnel finding new purpose. "Latest statistics just came in," he announced. "Storm Riders units have participated in over 300 successful rescues this year alone. Response times in remote areas down 60%. James watched his newest recruits, veterans, fresh from service, still carrying the weight of their experiences, but now finding a way forward. "Remember when we thought respect had to be taken?" He shook his head. "Turns out it's earned one rescue at a time." The clearing filled with familiar faces as the community gathered for the annual memorial service. Sheriff Carlos, now approaching retirement, stood with his deputies, many of whom had completed the Storm Riders emergency response training. "Got a call from the governor yesterday," Carlos shared. "They're expanding the program to include forest fire response. Your riders can reach places our regular vehicles can't." The rescued family from Thunder Ridge arrived, now regular attendees at memorial events. Their youngest, no longer a small child, wore a junior rescue service uniform, inspired by those who had saved his life. "Mr. Maxwell," the boy called out to James, "I start my EMT training next week. Maybe someday I can join the Storm Riders too." James knelt beside him, just as he had years ago on the mountain. "Keep working hard, kid. We'll always need people willing to ride into storms to help others." Michael watched the interaction, remembering how close they'd come to losing this. place to anger and misunderstanding. Now the memorial site stood as a testament to transformation, to finding purpose in pain. "Base to all units," the radio crackled, a familiar voice carrying across the gathering. "We've got situation developing. On Eagle Peak, climbers in distress." Without hesitation, storm riders moved to their bikes, rescue personnel to their vehicles. The seamless coordination between the groups, a testament to years of working together. "Storm riders, mount up!" James commanded, his voice carrying the authority of both military service and earned respect. "Eagle Peak team, take point, medical support, follow our lead." Emma quickly briefed the responding units, her tablet displaying weather conditions and terrain maps. The integration of modern technology with the storm riders' expertise had revolutionized mountain rescue operations. "Remember," James called, out to his team, "we ride for those who can't. We serve in their memory. Storm riders, roll out." The gathered crowd watched as bikes and rescue vehicles deployed, their lights flashing in perfect synchronization. The memorial site, once a place of conflict, now served as command center for a new kind of mission. "You know what gets me?" Dr. Torres said softly, watching the response team disappear into the mountain roads. "How something so right came from something that started so wrong." Michael nodded, remembering the confrontation that had sparked this transformation. "Tom used to say that the hardest storms bring the most important changes." The remaining storm riders stood at attention near the memorial, their leather vests now symbols of service rather than rebellion. Each wore their military decorations, proudly alongside their rescue certification badges. "Latest recruitment numbers are in," Emma reported, checking her tablet. "Veteran applications for the program are up 300%. We're expanding to 12 new locations next month." The sound of motorcycles faded into the distance as the rescue team tackled their latest mission. Above them, the mountains stood silent, witness to the ongoing transformation of pain into purpose, anger into service. "They're saving more than just lives up there," Sheriff Carlos observed. "They're saving themselves, one mission at a time." The memorial flags flew straight in the mountain wind, their shadows touching both the original plaque and the new additions. As he plaques honoring storm riders who'd given their lives in rescue operations, continuing the legacy of service that Tom and Marcus began. A young deputy approached, her uniform bearing both police and storm riders' insignias. "Sir, the new training facility is ready for inspection. First class of veteran trainees arrives next week." James looked at Michael, seeking the older man's approval before responding. The relationship between them had evolved from confrontation to mentorship, their shared commitment to service bridging the years and experiences that separated them. "Tell them to be ready," James replied. "The storms don't wait, and neither do we." On a snowy December morning, 10 years after the confrontation that changed everything, Michael Mitchell stood at the podium of the newly completed Veterans Service Center. The building, constructed beside the memorial site, represented the full realization of what had begun with a simple act of remembrance. "A decade ago," he began, addressing the packed auditorium, "this ground was contested territory. Today, it stands as proof that service never really ends. It just finds new paths." The audience represented the program's success. Storm riders in their leather vests sitting alongside military officers, rescue personnel next to government officials. James Maxwell, now a nationally recognized leader in veteran rehabilitation, sat in the front row, his original Storm Riders patch framed by official emergency response credentials. 10 years, James mused during a break in the ceremonies. Over 2,000 successful rescues, 15 states running full programs. Sometimes I still can't believe how it all started. The Veterans Service Center gleamed with new purpose. Training rooms equipped for both emergency response and veteran support, a state-of-the-art dispatch center, and most importantly, a space where returning service members could find their way back to purpose. Latest numbers just came in, Emma announced, now Director of Medical Operations for the expanded program. Veteran suicide rates in counties with active Storm Riders units have dropped 60%. We're not just saving lives on the mountains anymore. Dr. Torres, his hair now fully grey but his dedication unchanged, reviewed files of new applicants. Every branch of service represented. Even had a Navy SEAL ask about joining last week. Word spreading. There's a place for warriors who still want to serve. The memorial site had grown into something Tom and Marcus could never have imagined. The original plaque remained central, but now it was surrounded by a growing testament to continued service. Photos of successful rescues lined the walls, each one a story of lives saved by those who had found new purpose. Mr. Mitchell, a young veteran, approached, his military bearing evident despite civilian clothes. Your friends, the ones this all started with, what would they think of all this? Michael studied the young man, seeing in him the same need for purpose that had once driven James and his crew. They'd say this is exactly what service looks like, people helping people no matter what uniform they wear. The sound of motorcycles drew attention to the window. A new group of Storm Riders was returning from training exercises, their bikes modified for rescue operations. Each rider wore the distinctive combination of leather vest and emergency response gear that had become their trademark. Remember when those engines meant trouble? Sheriff Carlos laughed, now retired but still active in the program's development. Now people hear them and know help's on the way. James gathered his original crew, most now serving as trainers for new recruits. The transformation in them remained the program's most powerful testimony. Former outlaws turned guardians, anger transformed into purpose. Storm Riders, he addressed them, his voice carrying the weight of their journey. Look around. This is what happens when we remember who we really are, when we find the right kind of mission. The center's dispatch room buzzed with activity as reports came in from units across the region. The Storm Riders' influence had spread far beyond their original territory, their model of veteran reintegration through service becoming a national standard. Got word from Washington, Emma shared during the lunch break. They're incorporating our training protocols into military discharge programs. Every separating service member will know there's a path forward. Michael watched as James led a group of new recruits through the memorial site, explaining its significance. The younger man's voice carried clearly through the winter air. This ground was sacred long before we understood why, James told them. 2 men gave their lives here, saving others. Now we honor their sacrifice by continuing their mission. The Veterans Service Center represented more than just a building. It was physical proof that healing was possible, that purpose could be found, that service could take new forms. You know what amazes me most? Dr. Torres reflected, watching another group of bikes head out for mountain training. How something that started with such anger could transform into so much good. The center's walls displayed the program's growth, maps showing Storm Riders units across the country, statistics proving their impact, photos of lives saved and veterans renewed. Had a call from the Canadian government, Sheriff Carlos mentioned. They're interested in implementing the program. Seems our Storm Riders are going international. James stood before the original memorial plaque, now the centerpiece of a larger monument to service and transformation. Everything we needed to know about purpose, he said quietly, was right here all along. We just had to remember how to see it. The winter sun caught the chrome of the rescue bikes, their emergency lights reflecting off fresh snow. Each machine represented countless hours of training, dedication, and the commitment to serve others. Tom and Marcus, Michael said, joining James at the memorial. They knew something we all had to learn, that true service isn't about the uniform. It's about the heart wearing it. The Veterans Service Center continued its work as evening approached, its lights a beacon in the mountain darkness. Inside, another group of veterans began their journey from military service to civilian purpose, guided by those who had already made the transition. "Storm Riders," James called out as the day's activities wound down. "Remember why we ride, not for ourselves, but for those who need us. The mission continues." The mountain winds carried his words across the transformed landscape, where a decade anger had given way to understanding, and purpose had been found in the most unexpected place. The memorial site, once contested ground, now stood as testament to the enduring power of service in all its forms. Michael Mitchell stood on the porch of his mountain home, watching the sun rise over a changed landscape. 15 years had passed since the confrontation at the memorial site, and the transformation it sparked continued to ripple outward. "Quite a view, isn't it?" Sarah's voice carried from behind him, her presence as steady as the mountains themselves. "Remember when we could barely see the memorial through the trees? Now look at it all." The Veterans Service Center gleamed in the distance, its windows catching the morning light. Beyond it, the training facilities and emergency response units spread across what had once been untamed mountainside. The sound of motorcycles, now a source of comfort rather than concern, echoed through the valleys as the morning shift began their patrols. "Dad!" Emma's voice carried excitement as she burst through the door, tablet in hand. "The President just signed it. The National Veterans Emergency Response Act. The Storm Riders program is now federal law." Michael accepted the tablet, reading the announcement. The legislation would establish Storm Riders units in every state, funding veteran transition programs based on the model that had grown from that first confrontation. James Maxwell arrived. In his official capacity as National Director of Veteran Emergency Services, his leather vest now complemented by a formal blazer. The former outlaw leader had become one of the country's most respected voices on veteran reintegration. 15 years, James reflected, joining them on the porch. Started with a fight over territory, ended up changing the whole country. He gestured toward the memorial site, where the original plaque still held center position. Tom and Marcus, they'd never believe what their sacrifice inspired. Dr. Torres's car pulled up, followed by Sheriff Carlos's old cruiser. Both men had officially retired, but remained active in the program's development. The morning gathering had become tradition, the original group meeting to reflect on their journey and plan for the future. "Got the latest numbers," Dr. Torres announced, his medical precision unchanged by retirement. "Storm Riders units have participated in over 10,000 successful rescues nationally. Veteran suicide rates continue to drop in areas with active programs." The sound of training exercises carried from the center. New recruits learning to navigate mountain terrain on rescue-modified motorcycles. Each class brought more veterans seeking purpose, drawn by the promise of continued service. "Remember that first rescue?" Emma asked, watching the trainees. "When the Storm Riders helped save that family on Thunder Ridge? Now we've got units operating in 3 countries." James nodded, his hand unconsciously touching the worn photograph of Tom Anderson he still carried. "That day taught us something we'd forgotten since leaving the service. It's not about the uniform. It's about the mission." Sarah brought out coffee as more visitors arrived, original Storm Riders, now serving as program directors, rescue personnel who'd been there from the start, veterans whose lives had been transformed by the program. "The Canadian units are fully operational," Carlos reported, accepting a cup. "Mexican border program launches next month. Storm Riders without borders. Who'd have thought?" Michael surveyed the gathering, seeing in each face the story of transformation. The memorial site had become more than just a place of remembrance. It was a symbol of redemption, of purpose, found in unexpected places. "You know what Tom used to say?" He addressed the group. "That the hardest part of serving isn't the danger. It's finding ways to keep serving when the uniform comes off." Looks like we found an answer to that. The Veterans Service Center had expanded again, its newest wing dedicated to family support. The program had grown to understand that helping veterans meant helping entire families transition to new forms of service. Got something to show you, James said, producing architectural plans. The Pentagon approved funding for 20 new centers, each one based on what we built here, each one starting with a memorial to remind us why we serve. Emma's tablet buzzed with updates from units across the country. Storm riders responding to wildfires in California, conducting water rescues in Florida, supporting emergency services during urban crises. The program had evolved far beyond its mountain rescue origins. The thing is, Dr. Torres observed, watching, new recruits practice evacuation procedures. We didn't just create a rescue program. We created a way home for warriors who thought they'd lost their path. Sarah squeezed Michael's hand as they watched the morning activities unfold. The simple act of standing up for respect at a memorial site had sparked something neither of them could have imagined. Storm riders, James called out to a passing training group. Remember the code. The recruits responded in unison. We ride for those who can't. We serve in their memory, through any storm, to any soul in need. The morning sun climbed higher, illuminating the changed landscape. Where there had once been conflict, there was now purpose. Where there had been anger, there was service. The memorial site stood as testament not just to lives lost, but to lives transformed. Sometimes, Michael said quietly, the greatest tributes aren't built in stone. They're built in lives changed, in service rendered, in purpose found. The mountains stood silent, witness to the continuing transformation, as they had 15 years ago when a confrontation between a rescue pilot and angry veterans had revealed a path none of them could have foreseen. The mission continues, James said, echoing words that had become the Storm Riders' motto. Different uniform, same purpose. We ride on, and in the quiet of a mountain morning, as bikes roared to life and rescue units began their daily duties, the spirit of service that Tom and Marcus had embodied lived on, not just in memory, but in the actions of those who had found their way back to purpose, one rescue at a time. The original plaque caught the morning light, its simple message now part of something far greater. For those who serve others, in any uniform, in any storm, the mission never ends. 20 years after the confrontation that changed everything, the Veterans Service Center hosted a special ceremony. The mountain clearing, once a contested memorial site, now served as the heart of a national movement. Michael Mitchell, his hair now fully white but his spirit unchanged, stood before a gathering that represented 2 decades of transformation. 20 years ago, he began, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. This ground was a battlefield of a different kind. Today it stands as proof that service knows no boundaries, wears no single uniform, and never truly ends. James Maxwell, recently returned from establishing Storm Riders programs in Europe, sat in his familiar leather vest, now adorned with international service medals. The former outlaw who had once threatened the memorial site had become a global ambassador for veteran reintegration through service. Last month, James shared during a quiet moment, we completed our 100,000th rescue, units operating in 28 countries. All because 2 men gave their lives here saving others and showed us what real service looks like. Emma, now overseeing the International Medical Training Program, moved through the crowd with her tablet, coordinating with units across time zones. The Storm Riders had evolved into a worldwide emergency response network, their expertise sought after, in crisis zones around the globe. Got the final numbers from the WHO study, she announced. Countries with active Storm Riders programs show a 70% reduction in veteran suicide rates. We're not just saving lives on mountains anymore. We're saving the ones who save others. The memorial site had grown into a sprawling complex of training facilities, support centers, and emergency response units. Yet at its heart, the original plaque remained, Tom and Marcus's sacrifice continuing to inspire new generations of service. Mr. Mitchell, a young storm rider, approached, her vest bearing both American and Ukrainian patches. The international units wanted you to have this. She presented a bound volume of rescue reports from around the world, each one a testament to the program's global impact. Dr. Torres, now in his 80s but still actively involved in program development, reviewed the latest expansion plans. Medical units in Africa, mountain rescue in the Himalayas, disaster response in South America. Tom and Marcus's legacy keeps growing. Sarah watched from her wheelchair as Michael accepted tributes from visiting dignitaries. Her recent stroke hadn't diminished her spirit, and she insisted on attending every major ceremony at the center. They finally understood, she said softly to Emma, what your father knew all along. Service is about the heart, not the uniform. The sound of motorcycles filled the air as units from around the world performed a ceremonial ride past. Each bike bore the distinctive Storm Riders insignia alongside the flags of their home nations. The roar of engines, once a symbol of defiance, now heralded hope and help arriving. "Remember that first confrontation?" James asked Michael as they watched the display. "How lost we were, how angry. Now look at us, helping others find their way back to purpose." The Veterans Service Center had become a model studied by governments worldwide. Its combination of emergency response training and veteran support had revolutionized how societies helped military personnel transition to civilian life. "The thing that gets me," Carlos reflected, now well into retirement but still a regular presence at the center, is how something so right came from something that started so wrong, like the whole thing was meant to be. A group of original Storm Riders, most now program directors themselves, gathered near the memorial plaque. Their transformation from angry veterans to respected leaders remained the program's most powerful testimony. 20 years, James addressed. Them, his voice carrying the weight of their journey. 20 years of riding into storms so others might live. 20 years of showing the world what veterans can do when they find the right mission. The ceremony continued as representatives from around the globe shared stories of lives saved, communities served, and veterans renewed. Each tale traced its origins back to this mountain clearing, where respect had overcome anger and purpose had defeated pain. "The United Nations just approved it," Emma announced, checking her tablet. "Storm Riders will officially coordinate all international mountain rescue operations, full diplomatic status for our units worldwide." Michael stood with Sarah beside the original memorial, their hands clasped as they had been that morning 20 years ago. The simple plaque that had sparked so much change caught the sunlight, its message as powerful as ever. Tom used to say, Michael shared with the gathering, that the greatest honor we can give the fallen is to live as they did, in service to others. "Looking at all of this, I'd say we've honored them well." James called the assembled Storm Riders to attention, their formation stretching across the clearing. Units from every continent, every branch of service, all united by the simple mission that had begun on this mountain. "Storm Riders!" His voice carried the authority of 20 years' leadership. "Remember why we ride. Not for glory, not for ourselves, but for those who need us, through any storm, to any soul in need." The response came in dozens of languages, but the meaning remained the same. We ride for those who can't. We serve in their memory. As the sun set on 20 years of transformation, the memorial site glowed with purpose. The lights of the Veterans Service Center shone like a beacon, guiding the way for those still searching for their path. The mission continues, James said, standing beside Michael as they watched the international units prepare for departure. Different uniforms, different languages, same purpose. We ride on. And in the quiet of a mountain evening, as bikes roared to life and rescue units resumed their vigilance, the spirit of service that had begun with two fallen heroes lived on. The memorial site, once contested ground, now stood as testament to the enduring power of purpose and the endless ways service could transform lives. The plaque caught the last rays of sunlight, its message now echoed in centers around the world. For those who serve others, in any uniform, in any storm, the mission never ends. Thank you for investing your time in this story. If you've been touched by this tale of transformation, dignity, and service, we deeply appreciate you subscribing to our channel. Your support allows us to continue sharing powerful stories like this one that remind us of the enduring spirit of service and the capacity for positive change. Click subscribe to stay connected and receive more inspiring content. We have new stories waiting to move and inspire you. What did you think of this story? Let us know in the comments below. And if you'd like to hear more stories about everyday heroes finding their path to purpose, make sure you're subscribed and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Thank you again for being part of our story sharing community.